The starship Aethelstan hangs adrift in perfect silence. Its crew stares into the viewport, but the familiar blue and white marble of Earth is gone. In its place lies only a deep and star-dusted blackness. Commander Eva Rostova's voice cracks over the comm, a tremor of disbelief in her tone as she demands navigation confirm their position. Where is Earth? That single, terrifying question ignites a mystery that will push them to the edge of sanity and the known universe. By the end of this journey, you will discover the shocking truth behind the disappearance of an entire world and the cosmic force responsible. Who could erase a planet from existence without a trace? And what would you be willing to sacrifice to get it back? What does true loneliness feel like when you are the last one who remembers home? A low, persistent chime echoed from the navigation console, a sound usually reserved for detecting distant pulsars or rogue comets. This was different. The ship's long-range sensors had painted a ghost on the main viewer, a massive gravitational ripple emanating from the exact coordinates of the solar system. It was not the gentle curve of a star's influence, but a violent distortion in the fabric of spacetime itself. Chief Science Officer Kalen's fingers flew across his panel, his voice a tight, controlled monotone that did little to hide his unease. He reported the readings are not consistent with any known cataclysm. There is no debris field, no expanding cloud of planetary fragments. Commander, it is as if the entire system was surgically removed. The word hung in the air, surgical, implying an intelligence, a precision that was far more terrifying than any random act of cosmic violence. The initial shock of Earth's absence curdled into something colder and far more insidious, a gripping fear that seeped into the very air of the bridge. They were not just lost, they were alone in a universe that had not just forgotten their home, but had seemingly erased it with deliberate, unimaginable force. The silence around them was no longer empty, it was watching. A faint, rhythmic pulse began to bleed through the static on the audio monitors, a ghost in the machine. It was a signal, but like nothing in any database, its modulation a complex, alien cadence that seemed to phase in and out of reality itself. It originated from the heart of a nearby nebula, a swirling cloud of cosmic dust and ionized gas that now seemed less like a celestial formation and more like a shroud. Commander Rostova did not hesitate, her voice cut through the heavy silence, sharp and decisive. Plot and intercept course, that signal is the only lead we have. It was not a request, it was an act of faith, a desperate gamble to chase a whisper into the terrifying unknown. To follow it meant turning their backs on the empty space where their home once spun, and plunging into a nebula that could hide anything or nothing at all. They were trading the certainty of despair for the fragile hope of a mystery, steering their ship toward a single, repeating note in an otherwise silent universe. What would they find at the source of that otherworldly pulse, a key to salvation or a more profound kind of oblivion? The nebula's dust parted like a curtain, revealing the source of the signal. It was a ship, or what was left of one. Its architecture was all wrong, a jagged silhouette of angles and spines that defied any known design philosophy. The hull was a tapestry of deep, scorched grooves, and no light flickered from within its viewports. It was a tomb, adrift in the colorful void. Engineer Soto was the first across the airlock, his breath misting in the frigid, stale air. His helmet lamp cut a lonely beam through the oppressive darkness, illuminating corridors that twisted in unnatural, non-Euclidean ways. He paused at a shattered console, his glove hovering over the inert controls. His voice was a hushed, almost reverent whisper over the comms. "The power signatures," he said, "they are not human. The very metal of the ship seems to hum with a residual energy that feels alien and deeply, fundamentally wrong." Then he found them, the log entries. Most were corrupted into digital static, but a few fragmented phrases remained, translated by the Aethelstan systems with agonizing slowness. One phrase repeated, a chilling refrain from a dead crew, event horizon collapse. The words confirmed their deepest, most unspoken fear. They were not the first to see a world vanish. They were merely the next to find the evidence, the sole inheritors of a warning left by a species that had already been erased. This was not a singular tragedy. It was a pattern, and they were now a part of it. The danger was not over. It had just begun. What killed the crew of this ghost ship, and were they simply following the same doomed path into the dark? The alien data stream felt like a scream trapped in crystal. Kalen's face was illuminated by the frantic, flickering glyphs scrolling across his terminal. His usual composure shattered into a mask of raw dread. He pieced together the fragments, his voice a hollow whisper that seemed to suck all the warmth from the bridge. "They are not called destroyers," he said. "They are called the architects. The log says they are pruning the timeline." The translation was crude, the concept staggering, but the final, targeted phrase was terrifyingly clear. "They deemed your world a threat." Kalen looked up, his eyes wide with a horror that was both personal and cosmic. "Commander, they did not destroy Earth." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. They erased it from existence. The entire bridge fell into a silence so profound the only sound was the hum of a ship that no longer had a home to call to. This was not an attack, it was not a war. It was gardening on a scale so vast it encompassed all of reality. Their enemy was not a fleet or an empire, but a force that treated entire worlds, entire histories, as mere branches to be snipped away for the health of some unimaginable whole. The sheer, impersonal scale of it was a colder void than any they had traveled through. What kind of power decides a planet is a weed in the garden of time? And what did humanity do to be deemed so dangerous that our very memory had to be removed from the universe? A sleek obsidian vessel materialized from the void beside them, its shape a silent blade against the nebula's glow. There was no hum of engines, no flare of exhaust, only a profound and menacing stillness. A voice, synthesized and cold, pierced their comms without any hailing protocol. "You are remnants of a corrected era. Cease your inquiry." Commander Rostova stood her ground, her own voice sharp with a defiance born of absolute loss. "We have a right to know what happened to our world." The answer was not words, but a searing lance of emerald energy that ripped past their starboard shield. The impact threw the crew against their harnesses, alarms screaming through the bridge. This was not a negotiation. It was an execution. The Aethelstan shuddered, its own defensive systems roaring to life as Rostova barked orders, veering the ship into a desperate, spiraling retreat. They were not warriors, but explorers, their vessel built for discovery, not for war. Every evasive maneuver was a prayer, every return shot a futile gesture against an enemy that moved with silent, predatory grace. What do you do when your very existence is considered a mistake by a power that can unmake planets? How do you fight an enemy that sees you as nothing more than a grammatical error in the story of the universe, a sentence that needs to be erased? Their flight was not just for survival, but for the memory of a blue world, a memory that now had to be enough to outrun oblivion. The Aethelstan tore through the nebula's edge, its hull groaning under the strain of an escape it was never designed to make. Behind them, the silent obsidian ship did not pursue. It simply watched, a stark reminder that they had been allowed to flee. The victory was a phantom. Alarms that had screamed in battle now wailed in a new, desperate key, signaling catastrophic system failures. On the main viewer, a schematic of the ship bloomed with angry red warnings. Their primary power conduit was fused shut, their long-range communications were a molten ruin, and their starboard thrusters were venting drive plasma into the void. They were not just wounded, they were crippled. Then a different sound cut through the chaos, a raw, guttural cry of pain from the engineering station. Ensign Rios was on the deck, his body flickering like a faulty hologram. One moment he was solid, the next he was a translucent phantom, the deck plates visible through his shuddering form. The ship's doctor, Aris, was at his side in an instant, a medical tricorder whirring uselessly in her hand. She looked up, her face ashen, and delivered a diagnosis that was colder than the vacuum outside. His molecular structure is destabilizing. It is not a physical injury, it is a temporal wound. The phrase hung in the air, more terrifying than any bleeding gash. A wound not in space, but in time itself. Rios was caught in a loop, his personal timeline unraveling, and there was no medical procedure, no known technology that could stitch him back into a single, stable existence. They were now hunted, wounded, and racing against a clock they did not understand, carrying a living ghost as proof of the price for seeking answers. How do you heal a man who is being unmade by the very laws of reality? And what happens when that same destructive force decides your entire species is next? The distress signal led them into the heart of a rogue asteroid field, a chaotic maze of tumbling rock and shadow. Nestled within the largest of them was a cavern of impossible scale, its interior humming with stolen power and shielded from all known forms of detection. This was the refuge of the forgotten. Their leader, Jax, was a man whose eyes held the weight of centuries, his face a roadmap of loss. He did not greet them as rescuers, but as fellow refugees arriving at a funeral. "You are not the first to lose a world," he said, his voice gravelly and worn. "We are the survivors of colonies that were fated long before your Earth." Mars Outpost 3, the Titan research station, the Centauri Proxima Generation ship, all gone, not destroyed but unmade. We are the weeds they missed. His words reframed their entire tragedy. Earth was not a unique target. It was the latest in a long, silent line of exterminations, a systematic pruning of humanity from the cosmic tree. The Aethelstan's crew had believed they were searching for answers to a singular catastrophe. They had instead found the last, desperate gathering of a species that had been systematically erased from the universe, a hidden chapter in their own history that they never knew was being written. This was not a safe harbor, it was a bunker at the end of time. "How many worlds have you seen vanish?" Rostova asked, the question hanging between them like a blade. Jack's smile was a bitter, thin line. "We stopped counting after the first dozen. The architects do not conquer, they cultivate, and anything that grows too wild, too unpredictable, is simply plucked from the soil of reality. We are not a colony, we are a resistance because there is nothing left for us but to fight the gardeners." Jax led them deeper into the asteroid's core, to a chamber where the air crackled with ozone and latent power. At its center, resting on a crude pedestal of fused rock and scavenged metal, was a device that hurt the eyes to look at. Its form was unstable, a shifting lattice of crystalline filaments that seemed to phase in and out of solidity. "This is the chronal resonator," Jax said, his voice a low rumble. "We pieced it together from wreckage, from echoes left behind when our own worlds were fated. It does not fire bullets or energy. It fires a discordant frequency, a wrong note in the song of time itself." He explained that the architects do not just erase a world, they sever its timeline, cutting it away from the flow of cause and effect. This device, he claimed, could create a localized temporal storm, a chaotic backlash that might disrupt their precise surgical process. It is a scalpel turned against the surgeon. Commander Rostova stared at the shimmering, dangerous object, and then at the faces of her crew and the haggard survivors around her. She saw the ghost of Ensign Rios flickering in the corner of her eye, a living testament to the cost of inaction. Her voice cut through the hum of the machine, clear and absolute. "We are not hiding anymore, we are taking the fight to them." The declaration was not a shout but a vow. It was a choice to stop being prey, to stop being a remnant, and to become a thorn in the side of godlike beings. The plan was a desperate long shot, a suicide run to bait the architects and fire this unstable weapon into the heart of their temporal machinery. It meant leaving the relative safety of the asteroid and flying straight back into the void from which they had just escaped, a tiny, angry spark challenging the darkness that had consumed a world. Could a single wrong note truly disrupt a cosmic symphony, or would it only hasten their own final, silent chord? The intelligence from the forgotten was a single set of coordinates burned onto a data crystal. It pointed to a region of dead space near a spinning pulsar, a celestial lighthouse whose regular flashes masked all other energy signatures. This was the architect outpost. As the Aethelstan dropped out of warp at the edge of the pulsar's influence field, the main viewer resolved the station. It was not a fortress. It was a perfect obsidian sphere, featureless and silent, orbiting in the violent radiation of the neutron star. Kalen leaned forward, his screen alive with readings that defied conventional physics. His voice was a hushed mix of awe and terror. It is not just a listening post. It is a nexus point. The term meant nothing to the rest of the crew until he explained. Think of reality as a vast flowing river. This station, he said, it sits at a specific bend in that river, a point where the current of time is thin and malleable. It does not just observe timelines, it monitors them for weakness, for branches that grow too chaotic. And when a branch is deemed a threat, this is the facility that likely initiates the cut. The silence on the bridge was heavier than before. They were not looking at a mere watchtower, they were staring at the scalpel that had excised their world. This silent, perfect sphere was the instrument of their grief, the source of the absolute nothingness where Earth had once been. It was both a monument to their enemy's power and the first tangible target they had ever possessed. To attack it was madness, to ignore it was to surrender the last shred of their purpose. What secrets lay inside that silent sphere, and were they prepared to learn the cold, mechanical truth of how a planet is unmade? The airlock hissed open onto a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. Commander Rostova stepped onto the obsidian floor of the architect station, her weapon held ready, but there was nothing to aim at. The interior was a vast, cavernous space, a geometric nightmare of sharp angles and seamless surfaces that stretched into a dizzying infinity. No control panels, no viewports, no signs of life. Just the hum of a machine that was not a machine. Engineer Soto knelt, running a scanner over a section of the wall. The readings made no sense. He looked up, his face pale in the glow of his device. Their technology does not use electricity, he muttered, his voice swallowed by the immense quiet. It uses structured time. The very walls are woven from solidified causality, the floors a lattice of temporal potential. We are not standing in a building, we are standing inside a clockwork universe. This was the lion's den, a place where the laws of physics were not just obeyed but engineered. Soto identified a pulsing nexus of energy, a node he theorized was a security protocol. It was not a lock to be picked, but a sequence of temporal harmonics to be precisely disrupted. His fingers danced across a portable emitter, generating a counter-frequency that was less a key and more a carefully timed cough in a silent library. A section of the wall shimmered and dissolved, revealing a corridor that pulsed with a soft, internal light. They were moving through the arteries of a god. Every step felt like a trespass against reality itself, a journey into the cold, mechanical heart of the force that had deemed their world a weed and plucked it from existence. What other secrets were woven into the frozen music of this place, and what price would they pay for reading the score? The corridor ended at a pulsating sphere of light, the station's core. It offered no resistance, as if their presence was too insignificant to register as a threat. Kalen linked his datapad directly to the energy field, and a torrent of information flooded their screens. It was not a battle plan or a declaration of war. It was a list, a cold, scrolling catalogue of celestial bodies, each tagged with a string of coordinates and a single, chilling status. Scheduled for recalibration. Earth was there, one entry among thousands, a single-line item in an endless administrative log. The sheer scale of the list was a vertigo worse than any spatial void. This was not a singular tragedy, it was routine maintenance on a cosmic scale. Then the core projected a record into the air before them. It was Earth, whole and beautiful, spinning in its familiar dance. But there was no explosion, no fire, no cataclysm. The planet simply began to glow, its continents and oceans dissolving into a uniform, brilliant light. The light then faded, not expanding outwards, but simply winking out of existence, leaving behind the same star-dusted blackness the Aethelstan's crew had first witnessed. Commander Rostova stood motionless, her face illuminated by the ghost of her world's final moments. Her voice, when it came, was flat and hollow, stripped of all emotion. It was so clean, so final. There was no rage in that moment, only a devastating, absolute clarity. The rage came later, a slow, cold burn that spread through the entire team as they stared at the bureaucratic log. This was not an act of passion or even hatred. It was an act of tidiness, a genocide performed with the sterile efficiency of a clerk archiving an old file. Their home, their history, every memory and dream had been deleted because it did not fit the pristine, ordered pattern of the universe. How do you fight an enemy that views your entire existence as a clerical error? The station's perfect silence shattered into a shrieking, multi-tonal alarm. The seamless walls around them flashed with crimson light, and the air itself began to thicken, humming with a rising, dissonant frequency. A shimmering wall of distorted light erupted from the corridor behind them, and as it swept forward, the very floor in its path crumbled not into debris but into fine, ancient dust. It was not a force field, it was a wave of accelerated time, aging the station's own structure millennia in a single second. Their escape route was vanishing before their eyes, consumed by its own rapid decay. Rostova slammed her hand against her comm, her voice raw and urgent against the screaming alarm. "Jax, we need an extraction now. They are not just trying to kill us. They are trying to erase us right here." The response from the Forgotten was crackled with static, Jax's voice strained. "We are reading the temporal surge. Hold position, we are coming in. You have to get back to the airlock," but the path was dissolving. The temporal distortion field was a slow, inexorable tide, and it was turning toward them. They were not just trapped in a hostile station, they were caught in an hourglass, and the sand was running out at a terrifying, impossible speed. Rios met Rostova's gaze through his flickering visor, his form a ghost against the dissolving corridor. He did not speak, he simply gave a single, sharp nod, his hand moving to the emergency release on his environment suit's power core. The command to stop him died in Rostova's throat. There was no time for argument, no time for a better plan. His timeline was already unraveling, a thread snipped from the tapestry of existence. To stay was to be erased, not just killed, but wiped from the past, present, and future. His sacrifice would not be a death, but a final, defiant act of will, a choice to make his ending mean something. He slammed the override, and the core on his chest began to whine, its pitch escalating into a scream. "Go," he said, his voice phasing in and out, layered with 100 echoes of itself. "The overload sequence is irreversible. The temporal distortion is the only thing that can fight their ordered time. Tell them we were here." Rostova turned, her heart a stone in her chest, and ran. The airlock sealed behind the last of the retreating team just as a wave of incandescent white light erupted from the corridor. It was not an explosion of heat and force, but of pure chronology. The station's shrieking alarms faltered, the crimson light stuttering into chaotic, silent flashes. The advancing wall of temporal decay shuddered, fractured, and then collapsed in on itself like a broken piece of glass. Rios had not broken the machine. He had introduced a screaming paradox into its heart, a moment of impossible, chaotic now that its pristine systems could not process. In the sudden, ringing silence, his final transmission was not a whisper, but a clear, stable signal, a single point of absolute certainty in the chaos he had created. It was the anchor of a memory he would never have, a message for a home that no longer existed. He had bought them their window, not with his life, but with the very fact that he had ever lived at all. Silence reclaimed the Aethelstan's bridge, heavier and more profound than before. They had escaped the outpost, but they carried a new kind of void within them, one carved out by the sterile, administrative nature of the genocide they had witnessed. In the quiet hum of the ship, Kalen worked, his face illuminated by the cold, scrolling glyphs of the stolen architect data. Hours bled together before he finally turned, his usual scientific detachment replaced by a look of raw, staggering comprehension. "We have it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They call it the confluence. It is the central hub of their entire network, the source of all their commands." "But Commander, it is not a place you can plot on a star chart." He tapped his screen and a complex, multi-dimensional schematic bloomed before them. "It is a fixed point in the timeline itself. That is how they control the flow of reality. They do not move through space to reach it, they move through time." The implication settled over the crew like a physical force. To confront the architects, to even attempt to challenge the force that had erased their world, they would have to abandon the last vestiges of normal physics. They were not planning a voyage across the galaxy, but a plunge into the river of time itself, aiming for a single, impossible eddy where their enemy had built its throne. It was a destination with no coordinates, only a when. How do you navigate to a point in history? What kind of vessel could survive a journey not through the void, but through the relentless, crushing current of cause and effect? The answers to those questions would require a leap of faith more terrifying than any jump into a black hole. The chronal resonator screamed, its crystalline lattice glowing white-hot as it siphoned the pulsar's raw fury. For a terrifying moment, the Aethelstan was the eye of a storm, balanced between the real and the impossible. Then space-time tore. It was not a gentle transition into warp, but a violent, gut-wrenching rip. The ship bucked and groaned, its metal skeleton screaming in protest as it was shoved through a wound in the universe. Outside the viewport, the orderly stars vanished, replaced by a maelstrom of swirling, impossible colors. This was not a tunnel of light, but a corridor of fractured memories and stolen time. Ghostly images flickered at the edges of perception, echoes of lives that were and might have been. A child's laughter echoed from a world of green grass that dissolved into desert. A city of glittering spires rose and fell in the space of a single, shuddering breath. Commander Rostova gripped her command chair, her knuckles white, her voice a fierce command cutting through the cacophony. "Hold her together, Soto, we are almost there." The engineer's reply was a strained grunt, his hands a blur as he routed emergency power to the buckling structural integrity field. The ship felt like it was being pulled apart atom by atom, caught in a current that was not meant for any vessel of matter. Then, with a final, deafening crack of reality itself, the tumult ceased. The Aethelstan drifted to a halt, the violent tremors subsiding into an unnerving, absolute stillness. They had arrived. Before them lay the confluence, and it defied every law of physics and sanity. There were no up or down, no left or right. Structures of impossible angles twisted in and out of themselves, their surfaces reflecting light from sources that did not exist. It was a realm built not in space, but from the very fabric of time, a silent, geometric heart where the universe's timeline was written, monitored, and edited. They had reached the source, and the sheer, silent madness of it was more terrifying than any weapon. The voice that echoed through the bridge was not a sound, but a thought forced into their minds, cold and vast as the void between galaxies. "You have trespassed in the garden of reality. You will be pruned." The words carried no malice, only the absolute, sterile certainty of a fact. Around them, the impossible geometry of the confluence shifted, the crystalline structures realigning not in space, but along the axis of time itself. Kalen stared at his readings, his face a mask of horror. "Commander, they are not a fleet. There are no individual ships. The entire realm is them. A singular, distributed consciousness inhabiting this place." We are not inside their base, we are inside their mind. The realization was a deeper chill than any vacuum. They had not traveled to a location to fight an enemy. They had flown directly into the awareness of the entity that had erased their world. The twisting structures around them were not buildings, they were thoughts. The shimmering light was not energy, it was cognition. How do you fight a god when you are standing inside its skull? Every move they made, every breath they took, was a thought in the mind of the thing that wanted them gone. Their very presence was a scream in a silent library, and the librarian was now awake. The luminous form before them was not a body, but a coalescence of pure logic, a shifting constellation of light and meaning. Its voice resonated not in the air, but in the deepest parts of their consciousness, stripping away emotion and leaving only cold, hard fact. Your species was an anomaly. Your brief, brilliant flare of existence introduced too many variables, too much unpredictable chaos into a carefully balanced equation. Erasure was not an act of malice. It was a necessary calculation for the stability of this cosmic epoch. The words landed with the weight of a final judgment, a verdict passed by a court that did not understand the concept of an appeal. Commander Rostova felt a cold fury rise within her, burning away the last of her awe. She stepped forward, her own voice a sharp, human counterpoint to the entity's serene monotone. You do not get to decide who lives and who dies. You call it chaos. We call it life. You call it a calculation. We call it murder. This was the true battlefield, not the impossible space around them, but the chasm between two irreconcilable views of existence. The architect saw the universe as a perfect, immutable equation, where any unpredictable element was a flaw to be corrected. Humanity saw it as a story, messy and beautiful and full of surprises. One saw a garden to be pruned, the other saw a wilderness to be explored. How do you argue with a god that sees your greatest triumphs, your art, your love, your very free will, as nothing more than a dangerous statistical error? Rostova's defiance was a spark thrown into a realm of pure order. The entity did not rage, it simply processed her statement, and its response was a wave of pure information, a data stream of cosmic history. They saw stars that had been guided away from supernova to preserve neighboring life-bearing clusters. They witnessed nascent civilizations gently steered from self-destruction. Every intervention was clean, precise, and utterly devoid of compassion. We are the shepherds of reality. Your world was a wildfire. To let it burn was to risk the entire forest. The logic was impeccable, the scale unimaginable. To this intelligence, Earth was not a tragedy. It was a contained burn, a preventative measure taken for the good of a greater whole. The physical safety of the Aethelstan was now secondary. If they could not win this argument, if they could not prove that their chaotic, fragile existence had value, then they had already lost. Their ship, their lives, their very memory would be nothing more than a correctly deleted file. The fate of every remaining human soul, and perhaps every other chaotic species in the universe, hung on this single, desperate philosophical stand. Every system has a flaw, even one built by gods. While Rostova's voice echoed in the silent mind of the confluence, Engineer Soto's focus was on the machine itself. His scanner fed him a cascade of impossible data, a symphony of temporal energy flowing in perfect, recursive harmony. It was this very perfection that caught his eye, a single, repeating pattern so flawless it was fragile. His breath caught in his throat. "Commander," he said, his voice cutting through the mental static. "The confluence operates on a closed loop, a perfect memory of its own actions. It pruned Earth, and that act became a fixed, unchangeable point in its own history, a cornerstone of its stability. But what if we gave it a contradiction? What if we forced it to remember the very thing it worked so hard to forget?" The idea was a spark of pure, terrifying genius. He proposed feeding the architect's own data stream back into itself, the complete record of Earth's erasure they had stolen from the outpost. It would be like holding up a mirror to a creature that believed itself invisible. The confluence, built on the principle of a clean, ordered timeline, would be forced to process an impossible event, the memory of a world it had declared never existed. "We do not need to break their machines," Soto whispered, a fierce light in his eyes. "We just need to make them remember. We can give their perfect system a ghost." The paradox would be a cognitive virus, a single grain of sand in an infinitely complex clockwork. It would not be an attack of force, but one of pure, undeniable truth. Could a memory, a simple record of a beautiful, lost world, become the most powerful weapon in the universe? The resonator screamed to life, its crystalline heart pulsing with the stolen memory of Earth. Kalen fed it the data stream, the entire recorded history of a living world, the scent of rain on soil, the sound of laughter in crowded cities, the quiet ache of a sunset over a calm sea. This was not an attack of energy, but of information, a ghost story told to a god that did not believe in spirits. The confluence reacted not with violence, but with a profound systemic shudder. The impossible geometries around the Aethelstan began to stutter, their perfect angles wavering like a reflection in disturbed water. The seamless surfaces fractured, revealing glimpses of chaotic static beneath, as if the very code of this place was struggling to compile. The luminous architect form flickered, its light dimming and intensifying in frantic, arrhythmic pulses. Its voice, when it came, was no longer a serene certainty, but a broken, digitized stammer echoing through their minds. "This," it stuttered, the words laced with a confusion that felt like the universe cracking, "is impossibility." The perfect, closed loop of its memory had been violated. It was being forced to hold two contradictory truths at once, that Earth had never existed, and that Earth had been beautiful and loved and real. The flawless system was choking on the paradox, its ordered reality breaking down under the weight of a single, beautiful, unbearable memory. The perfect silence of the confluence shattered into a screaming, chaotic wind. The geometries around them convulsed, crystalline towers twisting into spirals that devoured their own ends, while pathways dissolved into clouds of shimmering dust. The Aethelstan was thrown sideways, its hull groaning as reality itself began to fray at the edges. On the main viewer, images flickered with blinding speed, a frantic slideshow of might-have-beens. They saw Earth whole and green, its cities gleaming under a yellow sun. Then, in a blink, it was a frozen ball of ice, its oceans locked solid. Another flash showed a human civilization of crystal spires reaching for the stars, only to be replaced by a primitive world where apes still swung in the trees. These were not memories, they were the ghosts of every possible timeline, every road not taken, now flooding into the present as the architect's control snapped. Kalen braced himself against his console, his voice a raw shout over the shrieking alarms. "The feedback loop is overloading their matrix. We are causing a total system crash." He was not celebrating, he was warning them. They had not just broken a machine, they had infected a god with a fatal idea, and now the universe in this one terrible point was suffering a psychotic break. The very law of cause and effect was unraveling, and they were trapped at the epicenter. What happens to a ship, to a crew, when the principle that every action must have a reaction simply ceases to be true? They were no longer fighting for their home. They were fighting to escape the death throes of a dying reality. A single, stable corridor of star-dusted blackness tore through the maelstrom of unraveling time. It was an escape route, a clean path back to the sanity of normal space. Every instinct screamed at Eva Rostova to take it, to flee the dying god and save her crew. But her eyes were fixed on the main viewer, on the frantic, beautiful chaos of a million possible Earths flickering in and out of existence. In that single, suspended heartbeat, she did not see an ending. She saw a genesis. The architect's system was not just broken, it was blank, a crashed canvas waiting for a new image. Her voice cut through the cacophony, sharp and absolute. "Reroute all power to the resonator. We are not just breaking their system, we are rebooting it." The order was a leap of faith that defied all logic. Engineer Soto's hands flew across his panel, his face a grim mask of concentration as he slammed the override. The chronal resonator, already strained to its limit, glowed with the ferocity of a newborn star, its hum deepening into a fundamental vibration that shook the ship's very atoms. They were no longer feeding it a ghost, they were feeding it a command, a single, desperate instruction woven from the last memory of a lost world and the defiant will of its children. They were attempting a universal Control-Alt-Delete, forcing a hard reset on reality itself from the inside. The gamble was absolute. If they failed, their atoms would be scattered across the corpse of a dead timeline. But if they succeeded, they would not just be survivors of an erasure, they would become the authors of a new beginning. What would you write onto the blank slate of the universe if you were given the chance to start over? The wave of white energy was not a force but a forgetting. It washed through the Aethelstan, through the crew, through the very fabric of the unraveling reality, and in its wake the screaming chaos simply ceased to be. The shuddering ship fell still, its groaning hull replaced by the gentle, familiar hum of a functional warp core. The main viewer, which had been a frantic tapestry of dying timelines, resolved into a simple, star-dusted blackness. And there, centered perfectly, hung a vision that stole the breath from every soul on the bridge. Earth, its swirls of white cloud, its vast blue oceans, its vibrant green continents, all exactly as they remembered. It was not a ghost, not a flickering echo. It was solid, it was real. The silence on the bridge was absolute, a collective intake of breath held for a moment that defied all known physics. They had not just escaped, they had reversed the irreversible. They had rebooted the universe, and the system had restored the file it had been programmed to delete. But what was the cost of such a miracle? Did the universe even remember it had been gone? The familiar blue marble hung in the void, a perfect, beautiful question mark. The Aethelstan drifted into Earth's orbit, its scarred hull a silent testament to a battle fought beyond the edges of reality. Below, the planet was a vibrant jewel, utterly unaware. A cacophony of transmissions flooded their comms, the familiar, chaotic buzz of a billion human lives, filled with traffic control queries, news broadcasts, and casual chatter. There was no silence, no gap, no memory of absence. The world had been restored perfectly, its timeline seamlessly stitched back together as if the tear had never occurred. For the crew, the joyous noise was a painful echo. They were the sole keepers of the truth, the only living souls who remembered the absolute, star-dusted silence that had once hung in this very space. They had won, but their victory was a private, haunting knowledge. The cheers and relief from the planet felt like a celebration in a room where only they knew a funeral had just taken place. They were hailed as heroes for a routine mission, welcomed home by a world that had no idea it had ever needed saving. The weight of that secret settled deep, a cold, lonely stone in the heart of their triumph. They had brought back a world, but they had lost their place in it. How do you go home when you are the only one who remembers it was lost? The celebration planetside was a whirlwind of lights and music, but for Commander Rostova, every smile from a stranger felt like a fresh wound. These people, laughing and living their lives, would never know the name Rios. They would never comprehend the flickering, unraveling form of a man who had traded his entire existence to buy this moment. His sacrifice was a footnote in a history that had been deleted and rewritten, a secret etched only into the hearts of his crewmates. Kalen stood at a viewport, watching the endless city lights glitter on the night side of the planet. He saw the constellations of human civilization, but his mind's eye superimposed the cold, scrolling list from the Architect Outpost, the countless other names tagged for recalibration. Mars Outpost 3, the Titan Research Station, the generations on Centauri Proxima. All of them were still gone, their stories plucked from the cosmic record, their memories surviving only in the hidden refuge of the forgotten. They had saved Earth, but they had not saved everyone. The victory was not a restoration of justice, but a single, desperate exception carved out of a monstrous, ongoing rule. The crew of the Aethelstan were not just heroes, they were living monuments to a war that had no official record, no medals, and no end. They carried the ghost of a lost comrade and the ghosts of 1,000 lost worlds back to a home that had never missed them, forever separated from the very people they had saved by the terrible, unshareable truth of what it cost. The celebration on Earth was a distant, glittering memory, a noise that had faded into the profound silence of the void. Commander Eva Rostova stood alone on the bridge, her hands resting on the cool surface of the viewport railing. Below, the planet turned in its flawless, silent dance, a perfect blue marble against the endless black. It was home exactly as it had always been, and the sight of it now carved a hollow ache in her chest. This was the deepest kind of loneliness, to be the sole guardian of a truth that had been erased from the universe itself. She turned slowly to face the others. Kalen watched his instruments with a new, permanent vigilance. Sato's shoulders were set with the weight of machines that could unmake reality. They were all changed, marked by a knowledge that separated them from every other soul on the world they had saved. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the quiet hum of the ship, a vow spoken not in triumph but in solemn acceptance. We remember, that is our burden and our duty. We guard the light, knowing how easily it can be extinguished. There were no cheers, no nods of agreement, only a shared and unbreakable understanding. They were no longer explorers. The Aethelstan pivoted smoothly, its navigation computer accepting a new, long-term course that would take it along the fringes of known space, a perpetual patrol in the silent dark. Its mission was no longer to seek out new life, but to stand watch over the old. They would listen for the silent frequencies, scan for the telltale distortions of a reality being edited, and remember the cold, sterile voice of a god that saw life as a calculation. They were the sentinels now, the keepers of the flame for a universe where the skies themselves could fade without a sound, and they would sail on, forever haunted by the beautiful, terrible silence they had fought to fill.